It was a quiet Thursday morning in Charleston, South Carolina. The kind of morning where the sunlight filtered gently through the white curtains of the oceanfront mansion, and the air carried the scent of the sea. Inside that mansion, Richard Lennox, a billionaire in his mid-50s, sat alone at his grand mahogany dining table, staring into a steaming cup of untouched coffee. The ticking of the antique clock was the only sound in the vast room. A man known for commanding boardrooms and steering empires, Richard now looked like a shell of himself. Even the grandeur of the sea-facing windows and polished floors could not mask the emptiness that echoed through his home. It had been 7 years since his wife, Caroline, had been pronounced dead in a fire that engulfed the charity hospital she volunteered at. Her remains were never recovered, but the DNA from a charred necklace had been enough to confirm her identity, or so the authorities claimed. Since then, Richard had withdrawn from everything except work. Friends drifted away, and his only son, Kyle, studied abroad and seldom called. Caroline had been the light of his life, and when that light went out, his world dimmed with it. His nights were sleepless, haunted by dreams of fire, of her voice calling from the smoke. He often found himself waking up gasping, only to face another lonely sunrise. That morning, Richard had driven himself to a nearby community center in the poor part of town, something he rarely did. The center had recently sent him a request for funding, and something, he didn't know what, compelled him to visit it in person. Perhaps it was the faded ink of his wife's signature on one of the archived donation letters, or maybe just a yearning to be where she once served. There was a pull in his chest, an inexplicable force guiding him to this place, almost as if her spirit were calling out to him. As Richard stepped into the center, he felt eyes turn toward him. A billionaire in an Armani suit didn't exactly blend in. The air smelled of stale books, linoleum, and dreams barely held together. Children played with donated toys, and volunteers bustled about. That's when he saw her, a young black girl, maybe 18 or 19, seated near the front desk with a clipboard and a ponytail held together with a red scrunchie. He gave her a polite nod and introduced himself. She blinked, squinting as if trying to match his face with something in her memory. "You're Caroline's husband, right?" she asked. The question was so sudden it caught him off guard. His heart did a strange flip. "Yes." "You knew her?" The girl's eyes softened. "Knew her? She saved my life." He stared. "But you must be mistaken. Caroline died in the fire." The girl leaned in and whispered, "No, sir. Your wife is still alive." For a full 10 seconds, Richard couldn't breathe. He laughed nervously. "I'm sorry. I saw her 2 months ago. In Atlanta. Working at a small shelter under a different name. But I'd know her face anywhere. She wears a scarf over her hair now, but she called herself Lena. She remembered me, too. Told me not to tell anyone." The girl paused, lowering her voice. "She had a scar on her left hand. Said she lost everything in the fire. But she was scared. Like someone was still looking for her." That night, Richard sat in his study, staring at the same photos he'd looked at 1,000 times. Caroline's smile. Her eyes. The way she laughed when he burned toast. Could it be true? Was she alive and hiding? Why would she do that? The next morning, Richard did something he hadn't done in years. He called in a favor from the best private investigator he knew, an ex-FBI agent named Morris Tate. Within hours, Tate was on his way to Atlanta. In the following days, the investigation took shape. Morris traced the shelter, cross-referenced employment records, and reviewed surveillance footage. A woman matching Caroline's height and build was seen entering the shelter at odd hours. She never spoke to many people, didn't drive, and went by Lena Marshall. But what struck Morris most was the woman's eyes in the grainy footage, the same kindness, the same sadness. Meanwhile, Richard flew to Atlanta, not informing anyone. He stood across the street from the shelter, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. And then he saw her. She was thinner, wearing clothes far below her class. But it was her. Her walk. Her posture. She handed a sandwich to a homeless man and patted his shoulder. For a moment, Richard thought he would collapse. He didn't approach her right away. Instead, he waited outside until she came out alone, carrying a box of expired canned goods. "Caroline," he called softly. She froze. The box slipped from her hands, cans clattering to the sidewalk. Slowly, she turned. Tears welled in her eyes. "Richard." The next few moments were a blur of disbelief, silent stares, and trembling lips. He reached for her hands, and she didn't pull away. They sat at a nearby bench as the sun dipped low behind the trees. She told him everything. How, during the fire, she had helped children escape through a back exit. A man had grabbed her, threatened her with a knife. She fought back, and he fell unconscious as flames raged. She ran. Days later, she was told the man was a fugitive wanted for multiple crimes, but also that his gang may still be looking for her. The authorities had mistakenly confirmed her death. Fearful, she let it stay that way. "I watched your interview on TV," she whispered. "You looked so broken. But I didn't want to bring danger to you or Kyle." Richard wept, right there on the bench. Years of grief poured from him. "You think I wouldn't have moved the earth to protect you?" She nodded, tears flowing. "But what about the people here? They need me. I found a new purpose." "Then let me help you," he said, gripping her hand. "Not just as your husband, but as your partner in this mission." Over the next several weeks, everything changed. Richard discreetly arranged for Caroline's safety. He brought in trusted security. The shelter she worked at received a mysterious anonymous donation big enough to rebuild 3 more shelters across Georgia. Caroline, still calling herself Lena to the public, expanded her work, reaching more people than ever. One evening, the young girl who had first recognized Caroline came back to visit. Richard thanked her personally. "You gave me back my life," he said. The girl smiled. "She gave me mine first." Kyle returned from abroad, speechless when he saw his mother again. The family spent long nights catching up on years lost, laughing, crying, and healing. Richard sold one of his companies and started a new foundation, the Caroline Hope Initiative. Focused on aiding grassroots shelters and empowering hidden heroes across the country. The story of Caroline's resurrection was never made public, for safety. But those she touched knew. And slowly, her name became a quiet legend among the downtrodden. Richard often found himself walking hand in hand with his wife, not at a luxury gala or boardroom dinner, but in the quiet alleyways of forgotten neighborhoods, handing out food, listening to stories, and restoring hope. They became a team again, not just lovers reunited, but warriors for a cause larger than themselves. In the dark corners of the city, their story spread, of a woman who came back from the ashes, and a man who never stopped loving her. Because sometimes, the greatest wealth isn't what you own, but who you find again. And the girl who spoke those words, she went on to college with a scholarship funded by the Lennox Foundation, graduating with honors in social work. Kindness had come full circle. And the ripples of one act of courage echoed through generations. Sometimes, love doesn't vanish, it hides in the ashes, waiting to be found again. And when truth finally emerges, it teaches us that the most valuable things in life are not wealth, status, or success, but connection, compassion, and the courage to begin again. The story of Richard and Caroline reminds us that even after the deepest losses, life has a way of bringing back light through kindness and faith. One selfless act, one brave voice, can heal years of pain. In a world full of uncertainty, it is love, humanity, and hope that truly make us whole again. Because real miracles are not always loud or dramatic, sometimes, they begin with a whisper from someone brave enough to speak.